Okay, we're recording. Oh, Chris Trumpy's about to join us. Getting a good crowd here. All right, anyways, Geoff, we're really excited for the opportunity to have this conversation with you this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. I know it's a little late out in the East Coast. Appreciate you staying up as long as you have. I appreciate also the forward that you send us with regards to what you were planning on talking about. So there are not too many mysteries of what we're going to chat about today. But
yeah, I didn't think an hour of my UVic career would be that interesting. So
no, well, probably not. So I'm sure there's some interesting parts that we'd love to hear you talk about. I certainly enjoyed watching you as a UVic player, but you obviously have a very interesting career path that you've followed. You've met a bunch of interesting people, and no doubt have a bunch of interesting stories to share. So without any further delay, why don't we jump in and talk about your first exposure to basketball while you were with your father in Hope?
Sure. Well, first of all, my dad actually played basketball at UBC for a couple of years. I think there are two people that remember his UBC career. One would be him, and he likes talking about how he believes he and I are the first father and son to ever play in the CIU national championships, which is I'm not sure he was at the first one, which is in Windsor. Now there are two issues with this characterization. One is we don't know that's true. Anyone else did it before. Second of all, it's very murky talking to him if he actually played. He was on the team. You don't really get a straight answer on how much he played, but he was there. I know that. The other person that is aware of his career is Kevin Hansen, because every year Hansen calls me and asks me for like a $50,000 scholarship in my dad's name to honor his UBC basketball career. And I'm like, well, I'm not so sure we're doing that. So, but he also played baseball at UBC. I know Ken's about 6-7 years younger than my dad. I know Ken and I have spoken. He remembers seeing my dad play up in Rupert and Terrace and those places. With my dad in the summers, they used to have kind of a semi-pro league up there, and he was a much better baseball player than basketball player. Now, importantly, his roommate and teammate, for stuff we'll get to later, while playing baseball at UBC, was none other than Stan Stewartson. So they've known each other forever, essentially.
Hey, Geoff, can I interrupt you for 1 sec?
Yeah.
There's somebody who's got a noise in the background that's, if everyone could just mute their stuff, that would be good, because we're getting some background noise from somebody. That would be you, Ken.
Somebody with a TV on.
Someone with a TV on.
Geoff, what? They can hear the TV.
Just push mute.
Got to put the headsets on. Sorry about that, gentlemen.
Or Ken, you can mute yourself. Oh, hang on, I'll mute you. Okay, you're muted. Okay, I just muted you. Okay, go ahead, Geoff. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So my dad, after that, he became a coach. He was a coach at Hope. We lived in Hope till I was 9 years old, and he was a good coach. He won 2 provincial championships. One boys with Hope and one girls in Penticton. And for those of you who know Carmen Dolfo, who's Western Washington coach, she was on his championship team in Penticton, so coached a great player there. But I started playing really young, like 4 or 5 years old. My dad had a hoop, like a regulation backboard and rim that he got from the school. He put it in our basement, and it was like, I don't know, 6 feet high or something. It was very high. But then we moved to a different house, and I had an outdoor hoop when I was 6, 7, 8, and I played like every day. And he had me doing drills every day and in the driveway. And I mean every day. And it wasn't for 10 minutes. I mean, I just can't imagine kids doing this now. And for those of you, I think everyone here saw me play to some degree. If I hadn't gotten that early start, I wouldn't have been a very good player, right? Because I wasn't super athletic. So all those fundamentals were drilled into me very young. And this is all solitary stuff. It wasn't like there was teams or anything. It was just me in the driveway for those years. And I'd do like halftime shows at the senior games and all that kind of stuff. I had a little routine.
No.
Yeah. And then when I was 7 and 8, I was the assistant manager of my dad's teams. So he wanted, I guess he didn't think I'd be a player. He wanted me to be the next Duds, I think. So, so I took stats. I was on the bench. I'd go to a lot of the practices, a lot of the road games, and I'd be like, listen to my dad yell at his players at halftime, all that kind of stuff. So, as a young kid, it was a pretty good introduction to the game. And then again, the Stan connection. When Stan got the job at SFU, he actually asked my dad to be his first assistant coach. And my dad thought about it, and it didn't pay anything, so he would have had to get a teaching job, somewhere near Burnaby, I guess. But he turned him down. But instead, they started what was called the Hope Clinic. It was a coach's clinic, and it was really kind of ahead of its time. There's a million of these clinics now, but it was really, I don't know if it was the first one, but it was one of the early ones. And I know Ken took his UVic team there, but it was a Stan show. But I know Ken when he was here recently, told me about going to the Hope Clinic and bringing out, SFU gave some crappy effort in their drills, and Ken took his team out and was very proud of the fact. Ken, you might want to chime in. Very proud of the fact how you guys perform. You want to say a couple words about that? Take him off mute, Phil.
Yeah, I'm trying to. Hang on. Go ahead, Ken, I think.
No, it says mute.
Hang on. Unmute audio. I can't seem to do it from here. Ken, you got to unmute your...
There you go.
Okay.
Yeah. Go. Sorry.
Oh, simply, I didn't want to go over and have to use the SFU guys to demonstrate, so I brought our guys, and we did work on the inside game, and we had just got new uniforms. And before the session, I said to them, there was 400 coaches there, and I said, this is a big thing. I mean, you're performing in front of 400 of the biggest critics that you're ever going to play it before. Anyway, I said, so we got to go out there and don't make me criticize anybody, right? For effort, especially. They did an absolutely stellar job. It was unbelievable. And they got about I'd say 3 or 4 minute standing ovation from the coaches at the end of it when I thanked them. It was a really, I was so proud of them. They did a fantastic job.
So this clinic was actually a pretty big deal. My dad had a big breakthrough it was 1976. Now, Nike and Converse, these guys didn't have these clinics, right? And the coaches didn't have contracts, shoe contracts. So whatever my dad paid them, it wasn't much, but they cared enough to come. So the 76, he had Al McGuire, he was coaching Marquette, and that was his last year. That was the year they came in October or whatever it was. That year they won the national championship, and Al McGuire came. He was this unique guy. He just came because he thought he wanted to ride his motorcycle from Vancouver to Hope. And he did. And, obviously there's no great hotels in Hope, and he stayed with my dad and his buddies, and they had some beers and all that kind of thing. And he sort of spread the word. So the next year he had Dean Smith and Jack Donahue. This is in Hope. Think about this.
Wow.
And my dad was very proud of that because the previous year had been the Olympics. And so he had the U.S. Olympic coach, Dean Smith, and the Canadian Olympic coach, Jack Donahue. Then he had Tark the next year. So it was kind of a rolling thing. And I got to go and I'd do all the drills. I was 8, 9, 10 years old. That's probably where I met Ken first. And I do all the drills. My dad would say, you can come and you can do all the drills if you do all the collating and stapling of all the things we sent out to all these, however many coaches there were in the province. So that was sort of my payment. So I was really into that. And I was this weird little kid in that I could read young. My mom was a grade 3 teacher, so I could read really young. So I had like all these basketball magazines at 6, 7 years old I'd get every week, like none of them exist anymore, but Basketball Times and Basketball Weekly and Basketball Digest and Sports Illustrated and all these kind of things. And my mom was happy with that because I would learn how to read, basically. So that's kind of what I did. But for me, the big March Madness, in Hope, we got 2 channels. We got CBS and we got CBC. We didn't even get CTV. So there wasn't, luckily CBS showed the programs. We didn't see many college games. We might drive down to my dad's friend's place in Vancouver to watch. I remember watching UCLA 75. So my big March Madness was the BC Boys Tournament. And we would go every year. I remember watching Hope lose in the first round in 1973 to the Robbie Paris-led Oak Bay Bays. At the game. I still have the program from 1973 and 74, in fact. We missed Hydes. My dad did coach single A, but we didn't. His team played double A, so we missed Hydes in 75. But we did go in 75. We went to, and my dad said, we're going to go watch Point Grey, which was Howard's team. And we got to root against Howard. And I said, well, you know, you say, why? And we weren't rooting against Point Grey. We were specifically rooting against Howard. And the reason was my dad had a player in 74 named Steve Ferguson who set the BC championship scoring record. And my dad was worried Howard was going to break it. So we'd go to watch Howard play, and we'd root for the other team. And Howard did, by the way, break it. Set the record. But I remember, you know, I watched Kaz in 78. Kaz, actually, I remember watching him play in Penticton in 78. So I was all into this. And even when we went to Penticton, I would be grade 6, grade 7. And you know how high school tournaments, you have if it's an 8-team tournament, you have the 4 games on Friday. Then the consolation tournament, the round starts at like 8:30 a.m. Saturday morning and goes, go all day. And my mom would drop me off just by myself, grade 6, grade 7. So I'd watch the whole tournament just by myself in the now when Penticton played, there'd be people there, but the other games, especially the 8:30 Saturday morning game, there'd be nobody there other than the teams that were, their family or whatever, and me in the stands. So, they had these all-star committees, and those guys weren't showing up for those games. So I'd be like in grade 6, and they'd take me aside and they say, "You were at the 8:30 game? Like, was this guy any good? Or, tell us what happened in that game." And they listened to me. So, they obviously knew my dad, but they knew me, and those were my big highlights. So that's what it was like. And, obviously I played a lot those years and, went through high school and everything, but really those early years were what formed my love of basketball. I mean, again, I remember Stan taking me when I'd go down to Vancouver, I'd stay with him and go to camps. And he was buddies with Hooker Wright. Ken will know who Hooker Wright is. He started the BC tournament. And Stan took me over to his house one day, and I was 11 maybe. And Hooker's going to meet this kid who's, interested in basketball. He and I spent like 5 hours together going through old memorabilia from the early tournaments, and I had a million questions. And he just loved it, right? He was an old guy at this point, and he thought, who is this kid? It was just very strange. So definitely an early start.
Yeah, very cool. And then, so you ended up playing high school basketball in Penticton, is that right?
Yeah.
And I understand you have a pretty interesting recruitment story.
Well, my recruitment really, and I talked a little bit about this a few years ago at Ken's Roast, but in a more tongue-in-cheek way. But yeah, I mean, there's really 3 schools. So Stanford was a great school, but and this is pre-internet, obviously. I didn't, we knew it was a good school, but we didn't know it was Stanford. And they offered me a half scholarship, and the other half of that half scholarship was like $17,000 US. And my parents are teachers, so they're like, what are you talking about? And the reason they offered me a half scholarship is they said, we have another guy who's a shooting guard, and we want to see, how you do versus him. We're giving him, I said, is he getting a full scholarship? Yes, he is. And it turns out it was, for those of you who remember this name, Todd Lichty. Todd Lichty became the all-time leading scorer in Stanford history. He was a 4-time All-Pac-10 player, a 3-time All-American. He is in the College Basketball Hall of Fame, and he played 10 years in the NBA. So I think one way or the other, I would have been back in BC pretty quick. So that wouldn't have worked out so great.
Yeah.
And then of course SFU with Stan. Now, again, he's friends with my dad. I would always see him. He, stay with his family. And my dad was buddies with him, but he also sort of knew Stan's ways, put it that way. And Stan offered me the world. He'd have him or some player send me something every single day, a letter or a postcard or some update. He'd call me all the time. And he had all this kind of, there was money from this, money from that, and there was free housing because he'd always buy these houses. And, I was sort of the guy. And my dad and Stan were friends. Remember I said I had this, I played when I was 5, 6 years old. He was coaching. He wasn't even coaching SFU at this point. He was coaching North Delta. He was obviously a great high school coach. And I was 6, and he had me sign this letter, like he printed it out, a letter of intent to attend North Delta High when I played high school basketball. And I'm 6 years old. I signed this thing. So now I'm 17, and we go for dinner. He pulls out this letter. He had kept it 10 years. And he said, "You committed to me 10 years ago. Now, I'm not at North Delta anymore. I'm at SFU. You signed." And he's obviously being somewhat funny, but I'm like, what? Who keeps this letter for 10 years? What? So I end up going to UVic, obviously. And, why? It was a better program. Ken was a better coach. But I will tell you, the one thing that, that my dad was really big on, those were why I wanted to go. And he knew Stan. There was a little bit of that. But the reason he really wanted me to go to UVic versus SFU is he said, SFU plays in that league against, St. Martin's and whoever the hell they play against. Who cares about that league? You're not playing for anything. Whereas UVic, it's not just that they won the national championships, which was obviously great, but it's that they were actually playing for them in the first place, and people cared about that. That was a really big deal to him. So I ended up obviously at UVic. And I will say, so once that happened, Stan came out and somebody interviewed him, and he said, we didn't even recruit. They asked him about me. He said, we didn't even recruit him. He's not good enough to play for us. And I will tell you who went crazy about that, Howard, because Howard was like, this is BS and blah, blah, blah. And I said, I don't really care. But I will say this, so that was 1985. My dad and Stan did not speak for 30 years after that. And, they were very, very tight. And my dad would obviously go to games when we played SFU, and Stan was back coaching them, and Stan wouldn't even look at him. So they didn't speak for 30. They only spoke when Stan knew he was dying of cancer. So 30 years later.
Wow. So obviously your father had a huge influence on you growing up. Would you say that
frankly, both my parents did, but yeah,
for
basketball.
Sure. Yeah. So would you say he influenced you to go to UVic, or was that a decision you made on your own? Or
I wouldn't. Again, he didn't like the fact where SFU played. That really was his big thing about SFU. But no, it was definitely my choice.
Okay, cool. And no regrets?
No, none at all.
Yeah, so
I love my time there, obviously.
Yeah.
I didn't love every practice, I will say. I didn't love every run on the chip trails, but overall, yeah, it was learned a lot about the game. I came very high. People thought I was going to be this, I'm sure Ken thought I was going to be, a national team player, all those types of things. And I had a decent career, but I probably didn't meet those expectations. But I think there's valuable lessons in that as well, right? I mean, we came in, my first year was the last championship year, and then we didn't win. We made the Final Four 2 other times, and then further to that, we made a final, and we lost by 1 point. But, that was viewed as horribly disappointing to everybody, including us. So that was a bit of, adversity and, disappointment to deal with. I'm sure the team, I'll ask Craig, would probably take that now, but at the time it was, very hard to take. And even personally, my first couple of years, I had big expectations. I don't know if Kenny remembers, I actually started my first 4 or 5 games. And then he said, you know what, we actually need guys who can play defense. So he put in Lloyd and Randy in the backcourt, and we won the national championships. But I wasn't a huge contributor at all to that team. Same second year. And, but the last 3 years, I was all Canada West and did well, but I actually just listened to Guy McPherson sent me an interview I did with him, and it was my last home game, and I had like an 8-minute interview at halftime, which I cannot even believe happened. But part of the interview was, was your career disappointing essentially? And I'm like, well, it wasn't maybe didn't meet expectations, but it was pretty decent. So, but again, there's valuable lessons in that, right? So.
And you had some international playing experience as well on the junior national team, did you not?
I played 3 summers, with Ken actually. So.
And what tournaments did you play in then?
Well, the big one was our last year. We played in the World Championships, the Junior World Championships. Came 6th, which at the time was the best Canada had done. It's funny. We actually had a little reunion of that team. Ken came out. I guess was it 2 years ago, Ken? I think.
3 maybe.
Yeah, 2 or 3. So we had, Tommy came in from Europe. JD came in from Europe. And we had guys from out west. I mean, it was really pretty cool, actually. So, this is 30-something years later. But that was the big one. And we kind of played, we did little tours. We went to Asia one year and we went to Europe another year. But yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
So for me, the same thing. I mean, the first year I was by far the leading scorer on the team. And then as you saw other guys who were more athletic, whose dad didn't have them playing at 6 years old, improve their skill level, it was the writing was on the wall that I was not going to be that level of player longer term.
Right. Okay. And I don't know what it was like for you, but in my final year, UVic had won, I think, either 4 or 5 in a row, and I just felt the pressure of the world to keep the momentum and the train rolling, as it were. Yeah. And not to be the captain of the team that ended the run. Did you feel similar pressure in that year where that team lost?
Well, that team was not a very good team. It was kind of a dysfunctional team. The year we didn't even make the tournament the year.
So your second year.
My second year, yeah. Jerry and I were on it. So we came 4th in Canada West. We played Alberta in the playoffs, and they were number 1 in the country. So we played them in Alberta, and we actually beat them. So that was actually a big win. And then we played UBC, and that was JD's freshman year. And JD had a huge series, and they beat us. We didn't get a wild card. So that was the one year that I played. We didn't make the tournament. The other years, we made, like I said, we made the Final Four, 2 of them in the final, another one. But yeah, we felt pressure, and it wasn't just pressure from like outside. We as players felt pressure. We had a lot of talent, and we expected to win.
So it was purely a coaching problem.
Yeah.
That was a major contributor.
A major contributor, yes. So, Geoff, you've gone on to and had a very rich professional life since UVic. What are some of the biggest lessons that you carry forward in dealing in the various arenas you've worked in?
Well, competing and doing, trying to reach your potential are obvious ones. Mm-hmm. And the things, and Jerry's kind of in the same arena. I mean, it's very competitive. I will also say one thing that really helped me when I worked as an investment banker, or certainly my early days in private equity, which is what I do now. It really is kind of your life. And I think playing at UVic, obviously you did other things. You were a student and you had a social life, but the overriding thing that dominated your life was this duty to basketball and duty to the team. And not everyone, if you're just a normal student and you start doing these careers, they're not used to that. They're used to having other things in life, and maybe that's not always the most healthy thing in some ways. But you certainly realized you sort of had your eye on the prize, and you realized you had specific things you were striving towards. I'll also say, the teamwork element. I worked at places like a Goldman Sachs where it really is a teamwork-based place, or it was when I was there at least. And seeing the team wins, seeing the team win. I remember Ken always drumming into us, "Do your job." There's a lot of that to what I did, just effort. I mean, I know people think of bankers, for example, as, oh, fat cat bankers. I mean, it's not that way at all. At least it wasn't when I was there. I mean, you were working easily over 100 hours a week for, every week. I once went like 8 months without a day off, and I'm including weekends. I mean, it's intense. So you have that intensity as well.
Yeah.
So lots of lessons.
Beautiful. So can you tell us a little bit about the shock you experienced going to Wharton?
Well, yeah. So, I'm from Hope in Penticton, and again, this is pre-internet, and I show up at, I went to Wharton, which at the time was, it was ranked number one. It probably wasn't the best school, but it's, top 3 in the world for sure. And you show up there, and all these people, they all knew each other, like whether it be from Harvard or Princeton or Yale or wherever they went to school. But not even that, they went to the right prep schools together. They grew up together. I'm sort of jumping in at the end, and this guy from UVic, and nobody at Wharton had heard of UVic. No one at Wharton had heard of any Canadian school, and except for McGill. McGill must have the greatest marketing department of all time, because that is the only school anyone in the U.S. at that time knew anything about. And I'd say I'm from Canada. The next question every single time: did you go to McGill? I'm like, no. You could have said Queens, U of T. They wouldn't have known any of those, just McGill. So I got there, and I'm like, I might have made a big mistake here. Like, all these people know each other, but I sort of went back and, again, compete. And once you got in the classroom, it was all fine. But at first, sort of the culture shock of, you felt like a bit of a fish out of water. I will say another thing that helped was, we had pickup basketball games. And, sort of asserting yourself that way and gaining some confidence that way. We, believe it or not, there is a business school national championship. We won it. We had a guy that was like a top, I think he was a 5th all-time leading scorer at Brown, who was our point guard. And we had a guy, his name was Mike Griffin, who was a starter on a national championship team for Michigan when they won. He was like the big white guy who could play defense. He was like 6'8", 6'9" guy, and he scored like 4 points a game for Michigan, but he was a starter. A guy like that, playing in business school basketball, it's pretty effective. Trust me. So, if you guys know Mike Clark came down, and Mike was playing professionally in South Africa then, and I said to Griffin, I'm like, my buddy's coming down. He's 6'8". I mean, he can score. Like, you might have a problem here. And we played for about 2 hours. I don't think Clark got a shot off. And Clark, after the game's like, I can't do a thing against that guy. I can't do a thing. So he was really good.
Wow. So from Wharton, was that a 2 or 3 year degree?
2.
Pardon?
2 years.
2 years, and then you ended up on Wall Street from there.
Yeah, I went to Goldman Sachs, which was at the time, well, it probably still is, considered sort of the top investment bank. Did 2 years in New York, and I did 1 year in London where with Jerry was there, so reconnected with Jerry a bit there. And so then I moved from investment banking to private equity. So the difference, just so those of you who don't know that industry, an investment, if you think about selling a building, an investment banker is like the realtor selling the building. A private equity guy is like the guy buying the building. So it's a different, you're not doing it. You're not an agent. As a banker, you're an agent. As what Jerry and I do now, you're a principal. You own what you buy something and own it and try and make it better. So I shifted to that about three years in. But again, Goldman Sachs, it was exhilarating in a lot of ways, but it was hard work. I mean, again, my parents are teachers. Remember, I'd be there at 3 a.m. and Penticton's 3 hours behind. My mom would call and she's like, "It's midnight here. Why are you still at your desk?" And I said, "Well, I got stuff to do." And she said, "I don't even know what you do. Like, what are you doing?" And I say, "Well, here's an example." And you couldn't use real companies, right? Because it's insider trading. I'd say, well, say Coke is buying Pepsi, just for an example. I'm advising Coke, how much to pay for Pepsi and how to negotiate it and how to structure it. And my mom would say, "Well, what do you know about that? Why would they ask you?" Kind of a fair point. And then she'd say, "There's got to be someone there I can talk to about this." And I'm 32 years old at the time. I'm like, "No, there's not anyone you can talk to. Sorry." So that was good. And then, like I said, I went to the private equity side, which I've been doing now 20 years.
So were you ever on the floor on Wall Street, the classic, what you see where they're trading?
First of all, that doesn't really even exist and didn't even exist then. It's all just people that in there. It's pretty boring, frankly. It's people at their computers, but that's trading. So that's not what I do. I invest in companies, and we're going to own these companies 5, 7, 9 years. So it's not a trading. I'm not buying shares of Microsoft or Amazon. It's investing in companies that we will own, and we will own a big piece of the company, if not the majority. And, I'll be on the board and work with, so my job now is working with management teams, CEOs, to try and figure out the strategy of the business, to figure out how to make it better. A lot of stuff on personnel. Do we have the right team in place for that company? Those types of things. So it's not trading every day at all.
Okay. So from there,
in a way, the basketball background is good because you have this management team. You're working as a team together. You gotta, again, people who, my mother, I'll just use her as an example. They have this vision of you coming in and saying, "I'm in charge. We own this company. This is what you're gonna do." And that's not how it works. I mean, you got to work together, try and figure things out. Working as a team together.
So it sounds like, based on some of the profile pieces you sent, that Wall Street was a bit of a different egg in terms of it being a little bit more, folks being a little more self-absorbed and full of themselves.
I worked for the ultimate guy for that. So I worked for this guy named Ted Forsman, and he passed away 10 years ago, but he was probably the biggest name in our industry when I joined his firm, and his firm was only 10 people. So when I got the job, he's not interviewing people like me. Ted was a guy, he was 60 at the time, 20 years ago. And he was one of these guys, he was single, never married, and he dated like Princess Diana, he dated Hurley, private jets, he lived this big life. And they said, well, you got the job, but you got to go talk to Ted for 15 minutes. And he had this reputation as a very big ego, gruff guy. So I go to see him in his big office, and he's like, they say, "Oh, Ted, this is Geoff. He's going to be joining the firm." So they leave us together for, I don't know how long it's going to be. And he's like, looks at me, he's like, "All right, what do you want?" I said, "Oh, what?" He goes, "What do you want? Do you have a question for me or what?" I said, I'm totally off guard. I'm like, "Well, yeah, you've been so successful. What keeps you driven doing this?" He goes, "Well, I can do this better than anybody else in the world in my sleep, and I've made $1 billion doing it. That's about it." I was like, "Okay." There's not really much of a reply to that. So I sort of shuffle off. But yeah, the reason I put this as a topic, it's a funny story. So eventually he decided, he saw the credit crisis coming in like 2007, and like 3 or 4 years before that, he said, "I'm not going to raise another fund for this firm." And that's how you raise money and then you invest it. He goes, "I'm going to shut it down." But he kept really 2 of us with us. And then at the end, it was just me with him. So we had a lot of time together, which was interesting. But we own this business, IMG, which is the world's biggest sports agency, but it does other things, but that was what it's most known for. So we were like Tiger Woods' agent and, Peyton Manning's agent, all these big sports guys, which I obviously loved. And, we ran Wimbledon, all these sports things. So he says to me, "What we need is some good publicity." I said, "All right." So he goes, "I'm going to call the New York Times," and he could do this. He called the New York Times up. He goes and basically said, "Write a nice article about me." So there's this, I still have a copy of the paper. It's this huge front page of the sports page because it's IMG, picture of him. And it's got these ridiculous quotes in the article. Like, I can spot talent that nobody else can. Like, nobody has a mind like mine. And it has these numbers. The company's going to earn profits of like, $225 million this year. I'm like, well, I got the budget. It's about 70, but okay, fine. So this gets published, and I'd get there, 8:00, and he'd always roll in about 9:30. And I get to my office, and I have like 20 emails from friends and voicemails and every people going, "This is the most unbelievable thing I've ever seen." They're like, "Is this a newspaper or a PR machine? Like, what is going on here? Like, did you guys pay for this?" Like, it's so over the top. And people are like, I mean, you guys got to be really happy with this, but it does seem like it's a little bit overly glowing. I'm like, oh, what do you know? What can I say? So Ted comes in. He goes, he's got the paper in his hand, and he goes, "Have you seen this?" I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "Can you believe this?" I'm like, "Well, it's pretty positive." He goes, "Pretty positive? The hell are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, you know, I read it. It says all these great things about you." And he goes, "Yeah, that's Geoff, you're missing the point." And I said, "Well, I got to tell you, I've had, like I said, I've had about 20 emails and all these voicemails. Everyone's raving about how positive this is. And a bunch of people from the company called me and said, you know, this is so great. The CEO called me. And he's like, well, those are people that are even dumber than you. And that's not you. I said, well, which he would say to me pretty regularly. I mean, his famous quote to me was always, if you want someone to be nice to you, call your mother. And so then he goes, you really don't understand what the problem is here. And I said, I'm sorry, I really don't. He goes, Geoff, this is why you are and always will be a very, very small man. And then, okay. I said, well, I give up. What is the problem here? Now, it happened to be the paper came out the day after, so it was in the paper that day. David Beckham announced he was coming to play for the LA Galaxy. And that was on the front page of the New York Times. We were on the front page of the sports page. And Ted said, they got some effing soccer player on the front page of the New York Times, and I'm on the front page of the sports page? Ted Forsman is not a sports page guy. I am a front page of the paper guy. And he called up the New York Times, and I had to sit there while he screamed at the New York Times for like 2 hours.
Oh my goodness! Wow, that's something special there.
There we go.
So being able to endure his incredible warmth and support, was your time at UVic under Ken Shields as an assistant for you there, a support there? Did that help you out?
Yeah, I would say, you know, it was obviously Ken could be critical. It was a different kind of criticism. I mean, Ted did it because Ken did it because he wanted to make you better. And sometimes, you know, let's be honest, we were all frustrated sometimes with that. But Ted wasn't like that. He wanted to belittle you and demean you. That was kind of how it was not to make you better. It was always to show how much he was bigger and better than you. Very different motivation.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me as somebody who is incredibly insecure for a man that successful.
He absolutely was.
Yeah. Yes. Interesting. So how long did you manage to work for this guy? And
I was
you
there
leave on your own volition, or did you get?
Yeah, I mean, well, the first few years we had a team of 10, and those people, I'm still friends with a lot of the other ones, were fantastic. I mean, they were absolutely brilliant. Yeah. And friends to this day. I've talked to 2 of them today. But it was just when he and I were alone together that it got up. He was a guy who really didn't have any friends, right? Despite all his trappings. So he and I would go for lunch really almost every day.
Yeah.
And
so
very interesting conversations.
No doubt. So what would you say, what were the most important lessons you gained from that experience?
Well, I will say this, he was a great investor. So that was good. I mean, I did see how he treated, not just with me, but how he treated people at some of our companies. And it was sort of a lesson in what not to do. But the actual investing, and he was a guy with a great gut. And he was a guy who, he truly did think way out of the box, which was very helpful. So I learned a lot from the guy, but just interpersonally, he was not a great guy. And, you know, that was a lesson in itself. I mean, the guy didn't really have any true friends. I mean, it's kind of by the way, he actually took a certain pride in that. He basically, his theory was he was so far advanced in his own man that no one could sort of keep up with him, but which really wasn't true, but that's just how he thought.
So,
I mean, I'll tell you another funny story about him. So we we basically owned tennis. Like Federer was our client, Nadal. Like Federer, I remember one time came to our office. The next day he came back, brought us a new coffee maker because our coffee was not any good. So we knew these guys pretty well, right? And so, and you know, we own all these tournaments, and somehow it came out that Ted bet. Roger told him he was playing. He wasn't playing. Nadal was playing somebody else, and Roger knew Nadal. And Roger told Ted like Nadal was actually hurt, and you know, he's going to play the final. So Ted bet $100,000 on the other guy. And he was just, and somehow this came out, and you know, we're on the board of all these tournaments. Like he can't be doing that, right? So he got like in real legal trouble. And his excuse, which didn't endear him to anybody, but I do believe he actually felt this way, because I was just bored sitting on the couch. Like I just wanted something to make the match interesting. And I really do think he felt that way, but he just couldn't relate to, he goes, I don't understand why these people have such an issue. It's not like it's a lot of money. Like who gives a shit? And you know,
did he win the bet?
He gave a shit. Like, so it was actually, we were going to get stripped of all these credentials and everything. We had to hire all these lawyers. He talked him out of it eventually.
So did he win his bet? Did Nadal win?
Before he started Forceman Little, he supported himself as a professional gambler. He knew how to bet.
Okay. Yeah. So Nadal did end up losing, and he won.
Yeah.
Oh. So you mentioned in your notes there that you encountered Trump. Was that during?
Well, this is sort of an aside, but because everyone's so interested in, did you ever meet Donald Trump in New York? And I did. Always because of Ted. I mean, so I met him 3 times. The last one was at Ted's funeral, and there was a little kind of, it was St. Patrick's, which is this big church in New York. There was this little area, sort of a VIP area, which I was certainly not a VIP, but I was, as a partner of the firm, I was in that section. So Donald was on my left and sort of just sat there somberly. We had a little brief chat. On my right, by the way, was George Lucas, the circles Ted traveled in. But yeah, so that was not a big deal. The first time I met him, we bought a business from this woman for $200 million. And how it works in New York is big charities, they always have like a guest of honor, and that guest of honor, basically if you know her well, or you're her lawyer or accountant or whatever, you buy a table and you fill up the table. So it's a way of raising money essentially. So there'll be tons of tables because you're basically honoring this person who's the guest of honor. And so we had just bought our business. So of course we get it. We are actually, because we just paid her a lot of money. We're at kind of the special head table kind of thing, which is like me, Ted, Isaiah Thomas was beside me. He was GM of the Knicks then, and like Conan O'Brien was at our table. So it's all like well-known people and me essentially. So they have an auction, and it was for autism, and which is a big charity, and there's probably a couple thousand people there, and they have an auction, and Ted does not have the patience to stay through dinner, of course, so he's like, okay, the auction's coming up, just buy something in the auction. I'm like, okay, well, what do you want me to get? He goes, Jesus Christ. And he's, what's the most expensive thing? So I don't know. Okay, there was a watch for like listed at $20,000. He goes, buy that for him, right? And I'm like, well, what, how much do you want me to, top out at? He goes, Jesus Christ, just buy it. So I said, okay. And the auctioneer is Trump. So, and so, the bidding starts and it's like, $6,000, whatever. And it gets past the 20 and I'm still, it's 24. And there's about 3 or 4 of us bidding. And it gets to like, I don't know, 40,000. And Trump like calls the organizer of the charity over and he goes, I know everybody here, but I don't know this, at the big table, like, I don't know this guy. Who's this guy? And the person whispers in his ear. He goes, "Oh, you're Teddy's guy. Where's Teddy?" I'm like, "Oh, he had to leave." And I will give Trump credit. He figured out in 1 second what was going on here. So now, like the other bidders drop out at like, I don't know, 45,000 or something. So now I keep bidding, And now Trump, as the auctioneer, is bidding against me, knowing that he knows I can't stop. So it ends up at $125,000. I buy this watch. And I go in the next day, and Ted's like, "Yeah, how was the thing? Whatever." And I said, "Fine." He goes, "Oh, did you bought the watch?" I'm like, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah." He goes, "How much?" I go, $125,000. He goes, "Jesus Christ, you're an idiot." What? I said, "You told me whatever it was." And like the only time ever that I worked for him, he's like, "Yeah, you're right. I did. Fair enough." So that was the second time. Again, I do give Trump a bit of credit on that one. He figured out exactly what was happening. The third one, this is tape, so I'll be a little. I won't give you the X-rated or R-rated version. I'll try to be a little bit sensitive on the language on this one. So in New York, and Ted at the time would have been 65, and Trump, was 20 years or 15 years ago, so Trump would have been early 60s, I guess. There's these women who are educated women. They're beautiful women. They work. They work in. They're not like strippers or people like that. They work real jobs, but they're beautiful women, often from great families, and they tend to date these older guys. And Ted and Donald both kind of sought all these same people. And so Ted and I go for dinner one night at the Four Seasons, a nice restaurant in New York. And Donald and Melania walk in. And Ted and Donald know each other. And Donald sees Ted, and he kind of comes over, and it's kind of like two dogs facing off a little bit. And it's like, "Hello, Teddy." Everyone called Ted Teddy. "Hello, Teddy." And it's like, "Hello, Donald." And they kind of stare at each other. And it's sort of this is Geoff, this is Melania, blah, blah, blah. And there's sort of this awkward discussion. And, after 2 minutes, Donald goes away. And Ted looks at me, he's just beaming. And I'm like, "What?" He goes, "Wasn't that great?" I'm like, "It was fine." I mean, like, I don't know. He goes, I go, "What do you mean?" He goes, "I nailed her. And he knows it. I love it." That was I'm like, okay, great. These 65-year-old guys like competing for these young women. It was like the craziest thing.
Well, it must be cool at 65 to even think you're in the game.
Oh, they were in the game.
Yes, at that age with that type of money, I guess they're in the game for sure. You're going to get a lot of attention.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So, yeah, you mentioned a bunch of other athletes. Do you have any other cool stories with any other athletes?
Well, because of IMG, I met a lot. I mean, I don't know if there's any cool stories, but well, yeah, it's not a cool story, but it's a funny story. So we used to sponsor Vijay Singh, and Ted and Vijay would play in the Pebble Beach every year. And Ted would say, "Yo, Vijay's my best friend," and which he was not. We paid Vijay $1 million a year to be Ted's best friend, essentially. Yeah. Wear our little logo. So we bought a radio company, and they were in our offices because they didn't have office space in New York. And because we own IMG, we own the radio company. Someone has a great idea, like, why don't we get Vijay, and we'll pay him. Obviously, we know his agent well. His agent works for us. We'll set this up so that Vijay can come and twice a year for the biggest ad buyers for the radio station. And we had like 400 radio stations. It's a pretty big company. And Vijay can come and meet with these guys and be on the range with them and go around while they play. And Vijay is notoriously two things: a very hard worker and kind of a jerk. So he comes, and he's not good at that kind of thing because he's not funny. He's not really those types of things. He doesn't really have the patience for people. So he decides it's twice a year. He decides for the second one he doesn't want to do it. And of course, the radio station CEO's like literally the next office over me, in my office, going like, "What the hell? He can't just pull out. We have a contract." On and on and on. I talk to the agent, Clark. His name's Clark Jones. I say, "Clark, you can't do this." And he goes, I know, but he really doesn't want to do it. And I'm like, "Clark, this is a sister company kind of relationship. We have a contract. We don't want you guys suing each other. This is not good." So he goes, "Okay." So Vijay is not stupid. He reads the contract, and what it actually says is he has to offer a date in the second half of the year. And if the company doesn't want to do it, well, then he's off the hook. Well, of course, what date does he offer? December 25th. So obviously they refuse, but you know, the amount of angst this caused, the CEO of the radio company screaming at me, the agent screaming at me, is just like, VJ, can you just, again, we're paying that. I think we're paying him like 50 grand for each time. And he just, it's just total jerk. But yeah, I met lots of guys who were great. All that we were NFL, all the big quarterbacks met, which I will, one thing I will say about that, when you know, met Brady, Peyton, Ben Roethlisberger, Eli, all these guys, when you meet those quarterbacks in person, they are big human beings. I mean, they have these wrists, Elway wrists, and they're all 6'5", like 230, 240. And just like their grips and they are men, big guys. Pretty impressive.
Yeah, and you know slouch yourself, so they must be.
Yeah, I don't have the same physique as these guys, believe me.
No, of course, but it's for sure. Okay, maybe just some more generic questions, and you may, I don't know if you may or may not feel that comfortable asking, but what as you're talking about this Ted guy who's obviously a multimillionaire, and you're sitting at his funeral.
Oh, he's a
billionaire, and you know, you're at his funeral, and he's got all these people around him, and you're reflecting on his life, maybe reflecting on your own. Yeah, what is it about him that, you know, important lessons that you learned about how to live your life, and what you want to do and want to avoid doing?
I don't know that I learned it. I would always have felt it, but then, you know, he was not a happy man. I mean, and I worked for Paul Allen in Seattle. Also, he was worth $25 billion. I mean, he was also not a happy man, both of them. So, you know, friendships, those types of things. Again, I wouldn't say I learned that from him, but just to see it starkly, these guys have every, you know, comfort in the world, and very successful, and actually very interesting guys, and bright guys, very bright, and still very unhappy. So you do realize what matters in life, for sure.
So how would you define success?
Happiness, ultimately, right? I mean, whether, you know, people, you know, on some dimensions, I guess I'm successful, but I don't have things like family, which means a lot more to, like, my sister, for example. That's what she's into. So she's every bit as successful as me, because she's in what matters to her. She's done as well as as I've done what matters to me, for sure. So, you know, I think ultimately having friends is a really important thing.
For sure.
And doing something that interests you. And I think everyone on this on this call probably likes competing. I really like that. So to me, that matters. To other people, that's not as big a thing. Doesn't mean they're less successful, quote unquote. It's different priorities.
Cool. Yeah, I'm putting you a little bit on the spot here. Just maybe one more sort of on the spot question is, why do you suppose you've been so successful, and how have you failed? Where have you failed? How have you failed it?
Well, I'm not sure exactly how successful I have been, but to the extent I've done well, again, I think great parents, great family, and a dad who's very, very competitive, a mom who's very empathetic. So hopefully a combination of those. I think frankly, growing up in a place like Penticton, one thing about a place like that, we had one high school. You got to learn to get along with everybody. So it's not sort of just, a lot of people that I work with, they only went to like the school with all the rich kids. And maybe in some ways the education could be better, I guess. I don't know. But in terms of socially getting along with people, my job now, I'm sure Jerry's is the same. It's really a people job, dealing with people. So I think learning at an early age how to do that and get along with everybody, I think, is a pretty important lesson. I mean, failures, lots along the way. I mean, again, I'm sure my UVic career is a little bit of a disappointment. I'm very satisfied with it, but certainly didn't necessarily meet the initial expectations. And just career-wise along the way, there's been, there's just, if you do investing at our size for a living, you're going to have obviously more winners than losers, or you wouldn't reach where you are, but you have things along the way that don't go well. It's just the way it is.
Mm-hmm. Geoff, would you mind if I unmute everybody and
yeah, of course,
some questions?
Sure.
Okay, I say, so I think I can do this. Well, unmute yourselves, guys, but please jump in with a question or two for Geoff while we have him. Our time is running out here.
I do have one thing I want to do at the end for a minute, but yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Clint, you got a question?
Oh, just appreciate you sharing, Geoff.
Sure.
Any, I guess maybe one question. I've heard you speak before, kind of on the couch in Toronto, but comparison between Paul Allen and Ted?
Yeah, they're very different. I mean, Ted, when Ted wanted to turn on the charm, he could be as charming as anybody on earth. He could be nasty, but if he wanted, he could really sell if he wanted to. Paul was a different guy. He was somewhere on the spectrum, as we say now, for sure. And he just was. He had no social niceties at all. But Paul had a very interesting mind. I mean, he put out a rock album that featured like Mick Jagger on it, and that Paul played guitar on, and Mick sang, and all these other people sang. He went exploring in the Arctic for sunken treasure. He wanted to build a rocket ship. Obviously, Microsoft. He owned the Seahawks. He owned the Blazers. And by the way, the Seahawks, who are very successful and very organized and everything, Paul had very little to do with that. If you remember the Jailblazers, completely dysfunctional. Paul was all over that. He was totally involved. He didn't really care about the Seahawks. He really did. He loved basketball. He was really into it. But so they were quite different characters, frankly.
When you say he was all over that, do you mean he was a big cause of the dysfunction? Yes,
he was the cause of the dysfunction.
Okay.
He was like suggesting trades, and he had a big gym at his place. The team, Portland, would practice at his house all the time. He was, and the Seahawks, he really had very little to do with.
Okay, interesting. Any other questions, guys?
Hey, Geoff, I got one for you. You remember the pickup game we played in Covent Gardens?
Yeah.
You remember what you said?
No.
Geoff and I were playing. I don't know what were we, like mid-30s, late 30s, or something?
I was 33, probably.
Yeah, so 33. Geoff's working, 100-hour weeks for Goldman, and we had this great idea. We're gonna go play a pickup game, and we show up, and it's just these clowns, running around the gym. We're playing, and we're losing badly. Like terribly. Geoff turns to me and goes, "These guys are terrible and we're losing. We got to quit." I'll never forget that. They were bad. They were terrible. We were worse.
Exactly. I blame Jerry.
Any other questions?
I got one.
Yeah.
Am I there, Geoff?
Yeah.
So your relationship with Paul Allen and the professional teams, did you at any time in your career have a hankering to become part of management of the franchises?
Not really. And frankly, that was, once when we owned IMG, and all the agents reported to me. I actually had I worked for that company for about 6 months. Like, I'm not just as an investor, but as an operator. They put me in there because I know a lot about sports and business. So I actually had a role there. And you realize when you're in that world pretty quickly, it really is financially driven. It's not as romantic as you might think in a lot of ways. A lot of the agents literally hate their clients and hate the sport even. And that's not all of them, but a lot of them do. And you realize all this scheduling that goes on and all these new tournaments and all this kind of stuff. It really is driven by money. And it just didn't appeal to me, frankly.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I just got a comment about hubby.
Yeah.
And you guys probably don't know, but he was really involved in commodities back in the 70s and 80s. Were you aware of that, Geoff?
No, not at all.
Yeah. Well, how many times did you hear him tell you about the price of eggs in Denmark?
Very good. Very good.
That's so many times from him.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious.
I have one thing I'd like to ask you. You guys who played for me who played against me in scrimmages, know that I always like to win my last game. And Geoff played a pivotal role in my last game at UBC. And Geoff, I'd like you to go over your version of that last minute or so at UBC.
Sure. So we're playing UBC, who had a good team, and hard fought battles, and back then big crowds at these games too. And the other element of it is, I'm very good friends, as is Jerry, I'm sure, but very good friends with a bunch of guys in their team. Like Mike Clark and I are best friends. JD and I are very, very close. And that's where Al Alon and I know each other really well. So we're playing against them. And there's, I guess, 5 seconds left, and it's a 1-point game, and they have the ball. They inbound and the ball's under their basket. They inbound the ball to Mike Clark.
6 seconds.
Importantly, 6 seconds, yes. Yeah, and Mike gets the ball, and if you know Mike, he wants to get fouled so he can get 2 points, in the bonus. So he stands there waiting to get fouled. Well, we don't foul him. We're just all over, and it's a 5-second call. So now it's our ball under their basket. 1 second left. We call timeout. We drop a play where I'm supposed to come off a screen to the corner and shoot, shoot a shot from the pass from the baseline. And Perry Scarlett is guarding me, and I come off. It might have been even Jerry.
Hold up. Tell him. I think Jerry and Spence were in a stack.
Yeah.
On one side of the court, you were on the other. You were across the block from them.
That's right.
Right. Tommy Johnson was up in the corner, high corner.
That's right. I come off the stack to the corner, and I realize it's Perry Scarlett. He's trailing me. I realize, just read it. They're on the block. I just curled right to the hoop, and he can't get around the screen. There's nobody around me. They just inbound the ball to me. I just lay it in, and we win. And UBC's going batshit crazy, right? First of all, it should have been a foul, and they didn't start the clock on time, and all this. But this Ken says it was 6 seconds left. They go crazy. And this isn't the funnest part of the story, but Bruce Enns is found in the showers the next morning, still in his suit from the game, and he missed the next couple of games, with mental health issues because of this game.
Actually, the rest of the season.
Yeah.
Yeah. But Geoff made the read because he was trailed, and he actually caught the ball and laid it in in the air.
Oh, okay.
Caught it in the air and laid it in because there was only 1 second on the clock. So
didn't the postman look to help out at all?
The postmen were guarding the guys in the stack really tight.
Yeah.
I was naked all alone.
Oh, you gotta love it. You gotta love it. Any other questions, guys? All right, Geoff, you said you wanted to end up with someone. Just looking at the time here.
Yeah.
Good for you.
I've remained quite close to the program over the years, and Craig and Clint have done some very nice things for me. I've tried to reciprocate in my own way. They've took me to Japan. So I root for the Vikes. You can see my gear here. Whenever they're in town, I like to go. I do watch Canada West TV still and all that. So I'm a big supporter of the program, and I'm proud to be a member of the program. But I'm going to tell you, I had one very disappointing thing this year, and I was quite upset with the program. So I'm going to be on my soapbox for 30 seconds here, and that involves Cord. I nominated him for the Hall of Fame. We knew Cord was dying. Ken came out to see him. Graham Taylor came out to see him. And Cord would matter-of-factly say, like, I am dying. And he also would say to me, it was a very big deal for him to make the Hall of Fame. And, if you go through Cord's credentials, he was a 3-time national champion. He was a 3-time CIU tournament all-star. He was the MVP of the tournament, 1986 when we won. He was an All-Canadian. He was 3 times Canada West first team. He was, we used to have those Canada Games kind of things. He was on 4 provincial, he played for BC 4 times. They won 4 national championships. He was all tournament, all 4 times. He was a carded athlete for 7 years. And to me, this is beyond Hall of Fame credentials. And I had, so I wrote a nomination. I had Spence as a fellow co-signer, or whatever the term is. I had JD, who really respects Cord. I had Graham, and I was really hopeful he would get in. I found out the morning of, and again, it was great that Ken could come out, and Ken saw him. You can ask him to see Cord in his state. Then he was down 125 pounds. I mean, it was not a pretty picture, and this really did mean a lot to him. I found out he died the morning of March 6th. That afternoon, the Hall of Fame inductees were announced, and he was not on the list. And I was obviously much more devastated that Cord passed away, but it really did bother me that he was not in this year. So I'm sure Clint is squirming there a little bit, but I'm fine with that, because this to me was a big deal. And sorry for the soapbox a little bit, but if you guys can sort of show support for that, I think Cord is very deserved, and I think I know it was really important to him. Obviously, it would have been great if he had lived to see that, but I know it was a big deal to him. So wanted to say that.
Okay.
I'll just say that I wrote a very strong letter in support of Cord as well.
Okay. Well, so thanks for that, Geoff. Maybe I'll throw a couple more questions just to end on a higher note here. So what lessons do you think is the most important for young players today that you would share with them
I mean, obviously there's the obvious things like, work on this, work on that. But I mean, the thing that I take away from my career, especially you, Vic, is you got to want to be coached. And I'm not sure that Ian and guys who are much closer than me now would know better, but I don't get the sense that's the attitude necessarily as much. And we were coached, and you had to come to practice every day ready to be coached. And that's not always fun. It's not always comfortable. It can be very frustrating, but it certainly made me a better player. It made us have certainly better teams. And I think that's just, again, I'm not close enough to it to really say, but I get the sense that people aren't as willing to take that on, and it really does matter.
So a willingness to be coached.
Well, and guys got to want to coach, properly as well. I mean, it's a two-way street, right?
Sure.
I don't know. If you don't go in with the idea of getting better every day, I don't think you get better. I mean, again, I'm not a coach, but I do work with young people in my job now, and we do have people that want that. I will say, our people are eager to learn. They're ambitious, and I think they take it pretty well, actually. There's all these stereotypes about, people don't want to be led or coached, or millennials and this and that. Yeah, there's some different expectations, and you can't treat them as you would have 25 years ago. People want more feedback. People want maybe a bit more instant gratification, but I can tell you, the people I work with, they're not afraid to work hard, and they're not afraid to try and get better. So I think if you do it right, and I think it's available. I mean, I would actually look at someone like Ian, and he still coaches. I don't know if I'm off base on that or what, but I think it's important. Or Craig, obviously. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So just one final question. So in all your years, what would you consider are the most fulfilling and rewarding sporting experiences for you, and professional experiences and achievements?
Yeah. Most rewarding sporting, there's a lot. I mean, you're on. The thing I can tell you this. The thing I cherish most about it is the relationships I still have. Again, having these reunions all these years later, having stuff like this, keeping in contact. I've had a lot of guys that I play with come out and stay here. Ken has, Eli has. It was great reconnecting with Cord and Graham Taylor and Spence and TJ and all these guys. So it's, to me, it's a relationships. I can't really think of an individual event that was great. And really, frankly, the same with business. I'm still close with a lot of people I've worked with over the years. It's always rewarding when a deal works out, and you win together as a team, both the investor and the company. But ultimately, I grew up with teams my whole life. It's being part of those teams.
Yeah, and I mean, I can't put myself in your shoes when it comes to these incredible investment numbers that are dollar figures that are thrown around. How do you where do you access the courage for that, and how do you quiet the, I mean, Jerry, to you as well, is how do you quiet the noise in your head around, is this the right thing, am I doing, it's just got to be in the background always a bit of doubt going there that you've got to put aside.
I mean, I've been doing it 20 years, right? It's not as much now, but I will, when I was starting out, for sure. And I will tell you a quick story, which is, we're obviously investing to try to make money, but the first thing I really did work on at Forsman Little, they had one bad investment in their 35 years of experience.
Wow.
And it was a telecom company in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, that went bankrupt. I wasn't there when we did the deal. I joined after they'd already done it. And it was a company that they bought it at a price, it was publicly traded, it was worth triple within 6 months. So all these people in Iowa who have stock options think they're super wealthy. And then 6 months later, the company is bankrupt. So I had to go out there for a year, 5 days a week, and try and figure out what to do in terms of putting the company through bankruptcy, selling some assets there, certainly laying some people off, all those types of things. And so, I know you're asking, like, are you nervous because your investment's going to go bad? I'm kind of beyond that, because, you've done enough of these. Yeah, I mean, to pull a trigger it's a big deal, but, you sort of learn to live with that. But in this particular case, you went out there and just see the devastation from, you have to lay off all these people, and they thought they were wealthy and now they're not. And, I'm around them every day for a year, and just seeing the sort of human cost when you get something wrong. Yeah, it really did. It was frankly a really good lesson, and a first thing I really worked on, to see, like, our decisions, it's not just on paper that you have a gain or a loss, right? There's a real human element to it. And seeing that, it was a really good lesson. So, when I think about things going wrong, we just had we're in the midst of a big pandemic, and, we have probably 25 companies we're invested in, and each one has its own story. Some of them are doing actually better than they would have been without this. But we have some things that are just not doing as well. And, again, there's a human cost to that in terms of layoffs in some cases, what have you. And I think some of our younger people who haven't been through something like this kind of still look at it as, my big lesson to them is always, life is not a spreadsheet. Get off the spreadsheet. Like, this is relationships, it's humans. And that's kind of how, when things go bad, that's what I think about, not just the fact we have a loss on paper. I mean, let's be honest, if I lost $100 million on an investment for Paul Allen, it wasn't going to change his life at all.
Right.
Whereas this changes people's lives.
Yeah, I guess that puts things in context.
Yeah.
Sure. All right. Any final questions before we bid our friend adieu here?
I'd just like to say one thing more. And I think you sell yourself short here, Geoff. And probably this applies to you too as well, Jerry. But you talk about you're not a coach, you're blah, blah, blah. You are a coach. You coach those people. And in your discipline, your discipline, and you're working with you recruit younger guys, and you put teams together and you coach them. And part of your success is, a lot of your success is how you coach people.
Yeah. Well, there's no doubt about it. That is true. I was speaking specifically of basketball. And for those of you probably nobody knows other than Ken. I've asked Ken I picked his brain over the years many times. I frankly, I engaged him semi-formally to help me out in some of these personnel issues, because I do respect the teachings that he gave us. And, those lessons apply over decades, and also in different industries or disciplines or whatever. The lessons, if you're in a people business, the lessons all apply still. So Ken has been very helpful to me in that way. So I thank you, Ken, on that.
Well, I didn't say that to get that response.
No, I know you didn't.
I do believe that.
Yeah.
Well, I've heard it said that the relationship you have with yourself impacts all other relationships. And what I appreciate about in listening to you this evening, Geoff, is your humility, the courage, your willingness to share openly. So thank you so much for that. And to hear some of these stories, you've clearly lived a full life with engaging and with a variety of really cool people, and much to envy, really.
Yeah, I mean, again, everyone has their own story. I'm sure everyone has their own things that are every bit as interesting. So, but I appreciate that. Thanks.
All right. Well,
All right.
if there aren't any final questions, we'll end it here. And thanks again, Geoff. And good night, everybody.
Go Vikes.
Right. Cheers.
Thanks,
Go
Phil.
Vikes. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.